Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Merry Christmas, Craig.
Hey, Merry Christmas.
Christmas time finally is here. Then the new year, and then we go into 2025 and see what that's going to turn out to be like.
Yep. It'll be something.
It's been a mixed feelings this year, just sort of like our episodes, I would say, this Christmas season. We did try to strike a bit of a balance between things we knew were going to be fun and funny and things that we knew we may not like or would be a little more dark and gruesome. Today's movie, we had really no choice, I think, but to do Terrifier 3, because it turns out that it's, last I read, it was the highest grossing unrated film of all time.
Yeah, something like that. Crazy. Uh-huh.
Yeah, like I think the only other unrated film that came close to it was like a Beyonce concert movie or something that was released in theaters.
Yeah. And I think it had a limited run too. Like I don't know.
Well, it kind of had to, right? Yeah, because usually theaters don't play unrated films.
Oh yeah, right.
Especially unrated films like this. And I know that the first two installments had that issue. The first installment was, I believe, crowdfunded, and I'm not even sure that it got much of a theatrical release.
It actually wasn't crowdfunded. He tried to crowdfund it, but he couldn't make the money.
Oh.
So producer came in and said, I'll fund it fully, but I want my name on it as a producer. And so he did, and that got it out there. And then for the sequel, that one he did crowdfund. They made tons of money. Like they got way more than they had targeted for, I think.
Well, they asked for a small amount. It was like $35,000 or something like that.
I think the second time it was 50. I don't know. I could be pulling these numbers. I've watched a lot of like videos about it today. So
I see.
I don't know if this is right. I think it was like 30 the first time around when they couldn't raise that much. And then I think he only raised it to like 50 for the next one, but they far exceeded that. And then because they exceeded it, they were able to do a lot more.
Right. And that ended up getting released in theaters, right? But there was at least one studio that had been interested in it, but ended up turning it down because they saw the script.
He didn't even want to go through a studio because he knew that they would force him to change things. And he's right. I'm sure he's absolutely right. I don't know what studio, but I also think that this is really interesting because I feel like this really opens a lot of doors.
Yes.
It goes to show that it is possible, if you can find your niche and you can find your audience, you can like self-fund or crowdfund or whatever and put out movies that are going to make a lot of money. And this movie has made a lot of money. And in doing that, you free yourself up so much. The studios and the producers have so much oversight that often what we end up getting is only a mere sliver of what was initially intended. I don't remember if it was the producer or who it was. The only thing that they asked of the director, Damien Leone, was to keep it under 2 hours. And He got really close. But I also read that the script that he turned in, the runtime was 2:05, and that's what the runtime of this movie is. So it sounds to me like they shot his script as he presented it, and that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. I read that he had to throw away a bunch of pages while he was shooting the last segment of it because he knew it was going to be too long. I don't know. This movie comes in with a lot more of a budget, a lot more resources than his first two movies. I remember that the second movie and the first movie were shot on a shoestring. He seems like a guy. I don't know. You probably know better than I do, but he seems like a guy who got into movies because he was very interested in practical effects. And then the first two, All Hallows Eve was a bit of a showcase for him in doing his effects. We did All Hallows Eve, and we found it pretty bad, but we did enjoy the Art the Clown segment just for how quirky and bold it was. And then I guess a lot of other people did too. The first two Terrifier films were shot with a crew of like 5 or 6 people at any given time. He was doing all the effects himself. He directed it. He edited it. Then this movie comes along, and effects teams who were impressed with the first one came in and said, we want to work with you. And so I think this is the first movie that he's done where he didn't work on the effects. If he did some work on the effects, it was minor. There were multiple effects teams as you scroll through the credits, because all the effects in this movie are pretty much gore effects and makeup effects. I mean,
yeah,
there's not much else. There's no magic happening. There's nothing else, just people getting cut up and creative ways. So, which is on par with the first two movies. The first one all took place in a warehouse. I watched it with my dad, and I warned my dad about it. We did that on this podcast as well, and I think at the time I'd said, I can see why people like it, but it really is a one-trick pony. It's just a bunch of people locked up in a warehouse. There's almost no story to it. It's just Art the Clown pops in, and they're going to get it, and it just remains to be seen how gruesome it's going to be. And then the second movie I never saw. And I believe that was a Halloween movie, right? And that came out, last year? That took like 6 years to make because, he was scrapping together resources. And then this one here, he had to get done in under a year. And so that's why he had so many teams working on it. And that was a different kind of pressure, he said.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we figured we had to do it this Christmas. We had no choice. So here we are. Merry Christmas, everyone. Terrifier 3. Craig, I wonder, had you seen the second movie as well?
Yep. And you still haven't?
No, I meant to watch it, but I didn't get the time.
Well, then I can only imagine
my confusion
that you. Yeah, and that you may not have been, all that invested in these people because I don't know. I mean, I figured it would be a continuation, but I kind of didn't realize that at this point, he seems to be doing something that I appreciate because I agree with you that I was getting a little tired of how bloody can it be? Like, okay, I get it. That's great. Good job topping yourself each time. That's great. But now I feel like he's trying to build a mythology and I can get on board with that. I like a mythology.
Right. Some story, at least.
I like a continuing mythology. I've stuck with Chucky for decades. And this movie, I feel like, seems very much intended to continue that core mythology. And I read that he started doing that in part 2, which he did, because he regretted... The response to the first movie was good. Mm-hmm. He got a lot of positive feedback about it, about Art specifically. People loved Art. They thought he was a great villain, wanted to see more of him, but they felt like the other characters in the movie were thin and undeveloped and you didn't really care about them. So Leone wanted in the second one to have more round, more fully developed characters that you're invested in and that you care about. And this girl, Lauren Lavera, who plays Sienna, she is the final girl of part 2. She's introduced in part 2 and is the final girl in part 2. And she continues that role. So she's really the female lead in both of these movies. I don't know how you felt about her coming in post-trauma, but I got really invested in this girl in the first movie. She's vulnerable, but she's tough. I like that they've cast her. The actress is petite and so potentially very vulnerable, but also really strong. And ultimately they make her special. But what I'm trying to get at is I think that this actress is really good. And so I'm into her and I'm rooting for her. So that does it for me. If it weren't for that, I think I would still be kind of meh about it. But I think I may end up defending this movie more than you would expect.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good thing I didn't watch it because we come in with a completely different mindsets, and that helps our listeners, I believe. I would tell you right now, if you're interested in seeing this movie and haven't seen the second one, you really ought to see the second one.
Yeah, you should.
Because I was very confused at the beginning of this, and I felt like the movie did a decent enough job of piecing some stuff together for me, but they didn't make it very clear. The way it starts out with these different characters, and there's this kind of monstrous woman, and there's a flashback to what I thought was the first movie, but now I'm not sure. I had to eventually go, okay, there's some backstory here I don't know. I'm just going to roll with it. And ultimately, I was fine. But it did affect my ability to, like you said, care a bit about these new characters because I didn't. It was only about 3/4 of the way through the movie that made it very clear to me. Oh, okay. This girl was the final girl from the first one. I mean, I had my suspicions, but I also thought maybe there were some other characters, too, who survived. And, I wasn't quite sure who they were and how they were related. And some of the things they were talking about, I just couldn't make a lot of sense of. I just had to chalk that up to, okay, this is just backstory that's either going to get filled in for me or I really needed to watch the second movie for. So if you really want to see this movie, you really ought to see the second one first. I would say 100%. Because ultimately, then, for me, not being so invested in this family, what this movie felt like was literally, because I looked at the timestamp, an hour and a half of Art the Clown randomly killing random people, just like he does in the first movie, while there's another story of sorts playing out parallel to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in these movies, there's always like someone you're following, and they're not going to be attacked until the end, or they're going to be menaced until the end when there's a showdown. And so I knew what was happening. I was just like, this family's not even being menaced. So for about half of this hour and a half runtime, I'm switching back to this family and hearing about their trauma, but I'm not really getting much else out of it. It's just like their interactions with each other. She's clearly traumatized. Okay, that's fine. But like, other than that, I'm just like, all right, well, when is Art going to show up on this side? They're not even being menaced yet. So they're just waiting here in the wings for me. And I felt like the movie could have been a lot shorter. You know, had there not been so much of that ultimately, you know, didn't matter to me. Now, maybe you found it more interesting because you were more invested in the character from the second one. I don't know.
Well, I guess because things develop from the first one a little bit. But you're right. I mean, it's an effects-driven movie. It's a Art the Clown character-driven movie. Like, it's just giving him a playground, you know, a Christmas playground to play in and chop people up. In fact, you know, we don't immediately return to these characters. And so I don't even remember if I had watched a trailer for this movie. I didn't know if those characters were going to be featured heavily, if they were going to get killed off in the first scene, if we were going to see them at all. Mm-hmm. And when the movie opened, the opening scene I thought was a great opening scene for a classic Christmas slasher.
Yes.
To be fair, far more gory and graphic than many that we've seen, but not all. And it was great. You know, it's a beautiful outdoor shot of this beautifully decorated home, decorated for Christmas, and the Christmas music is playing and the colored lights are glowing, and it's perfect. You know, it's this perfect Christmas place, and this perfect little family lives there, and you hear like the footsteps on the roof, and little Sally or whatever her name is goes into her parents' house and it's like, there's somebody on the roof, it's Santa Claus, and they're like, no, go back to bed. But like, it's exact, you know, it's perfect, frankly.
Yeah. It's like homage, really. We've seen so many start out like this.
Yeah. Right. And he said that he was inspired by those Tales from the Crypt segments. There was the original one and then the remake. I think we've talked about
All
both
Through the House.
All Through the House. And this is very much like that, too. Because eventually the mom and dad go back to bed, the brother is in his room asleep, and the little girl still hears stuff, and so she goes down there, and there's Santa Claus, but it's Art the Clown, and she runs and hides before he sees him. He pulls out an axe and goes and chops up her whole family in a really, really gruesome display. Now, I will say that I think these effects look great. What I like the most about them is they don't make me sick, because they ring of the effects of the 80s.
Yes.
It's almost that it's so extreme as to be beyond the realm of reality. And so it just doesn't bother me. Like, I'm like, it's fake. You know, like,
Right.
There's so much blood, just blood covering every surface. It's bright red. When you see and you do all the time, it's all the time people getting chopped up, getting their faces ripped off, chopped off, limbs chopped off, every gory, nasty, disgusting thing you can think of captured in great detail on camera. But the effects look practical. I don't know. Maybe that is what skin would look like if you were chopping into it, but it looks like a practical effect to me. And I like that. I've always liked practical effects, and so I can get on board for that, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that extreme violence didn't disturb me as much as I thought I would. Normally, when it comes to this kind of violence, it's more the idea of it. You know, it's what's happening to the person and what that would be like if that had happened to you, more than just, you know, what you're seeing visually on the screen. So, you know, you're right. You watch a movie like Misery, for example, and you see her hobble, poor James Caan, in the bed.
Right.
And you're going to get perhaps, I mean, anyway, are going to get a much more emotional reaction than when I see Art go in with a chainsaw, you know, to rip apart, you know, two people in the shower. Something about that, I just can't imagine that happening to me. It's a little too detached from my reality, and it's not presented, like you said, in a realistic way.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. Like you said, I suppose there's only so many ways you can thrust a chainsaw into somebody, but
right.
You know, It's just there's a detachment there. So I can understand why this movie would have more of a broad audience than I originally expected this series to have. Because more people, I think, can take it because it is so, in a way, fantastical, like you said. Although, I have to admit, I was impressed with the effects of the first movie when Leone was doing it. That scene where he saw straight down through a person, that was pretty horrific, and that turned my stomach a bit, and I thought that was as realistic as I imagined it could be. This one, I also thought the effects were good, and I thought they were a couple notches better. Probably because you had more experienced teams working on it. I did appreciate that aspect of it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and a $2 million budget is significantly larger than 50,000 or whatever for the second one. But the other thing that removes those kills, many of them, it removes them from reality is because he and his little sidekick, who we'll talk about in a second, are destroying these people's bodies. And yet they remain awake and alert. Like, that is just absolutely impossible. And so in my head, I'm like, this is fiction. Like,
that's true.
I am removed from this. I don't have to be scared of it. I don't have to be even grossed out by it. It's not real. It's all good.
Now, can you answer a quick question for me before we go on?
Yeah.
The girl who survived, I suppose, the Christmas massacre in the very beginning scene, because Art is about to leave the house and then he hears a noise in the cupboard and he opens it up and the girl is cowering in there and he waves at her. Are we to believe that he killed her, or am I off and she is now an adult somewhere or an older person somewhere in the movie?
I think that they are intentionally leaving that open so that they could potentially use her later, because you see in this movie that they need hosts, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole thing. Like, in the first movie, and I just finished watching like a history of thing. In all of the shorts, including the All Hallows Eve or whatever, there was a supernatural element to Art. He decided in the first Terrifier movie that he wanted to abandon that and make Art just a real guy. Just a guy. A killer. A serial killer. But then, when he resurrects in the second one, it's just his body, or he's been reanimated by some outside supernatural force, and now he's supernatural. In the second movie, there's a little girl character, a little evil girl like him, and it's unclear what their relationship is, except for you do see a newspaper article that says a little girl was murdered at some point, and it looks like that girl, and her name is Emily, and in the first movie, the crazy lady who had the doll in the warehouse said, "This is my baby. Her name is Emily." Speculation at this point is that whatever is possessing this little girl is the thing that brought Art to life. And at this point, at the end, you saw the aftermath of this, but at the end of the second movie, he and Sienna have a huge fight. I read too that the finale was toned down for this one for time purposes, and I'm not surprised, because the finale was super long in the second one, and I'm glad that they had to shorten it for this one because it was so brutal, and I just got really sick of seeing that young woman brutalized for my entertainment. Like, It just went on for too long for me. It was too much. And it was impossible. There was no, it was just impossible that she could move. Now, to be fair, the other part of the backstory that you missed is she somehow is a chosen one. Her dad was a cartoonist. He started apparently having visions of art and other things and was drawing them, and he drew this hero that he designed for her that you saw in this movie, and that's what she dresses for as Halloween, and that's what she fights Art with, and with that sword, but it goes on forever. She ends up decapitating him, and that's when we go back to the monstrous woman that you were talking about, who is the final girl from the first movie, I believe.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure she's either the final girl from the first movie or the reporter that interviewed her. I'm a little iffy on that one, but she's definitely from the first movie. And she, at the end of the second one, I guess at this point we're supposed to understand that she killed herself and recently died. So now she's possessed too, and possessed her birthed Art's head.
Wow. Oh.
Gave birth to it. It came out of her. That's why it was like, it had like a umbilical cord like attached to its neck.
Was that like an ending in the second movie?
Yes.
Or is that what we're supposed
Yes.
Okay.
That was
okay.
that was the shocking ending of the second movie.
Yeah, that would have been hilarious if I had seen that first.
After that opening scene, it cuts back to 5 years later? 5 years earlier?
Earlier, yeah. The time jumping confused me a bit.
As it turns out, these events take place. I don't even know. I'm confused now.
I think what happens is, no, because it jumps to 5 years earlier. So the Christmas scene we're just talking about is present day.
Yes, that's right.
It jumps to 5 years earlier to catch us up on
That's right.
what you just described, basically, and then how that turned out.
They had to explain how he came back. Yeah.
And it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way he came back, okay, so his head was birthed. The cops came into the room and discovered, after the massacre, discovered his headless corpse. Then they came in and discovered this girl, and Art's head is chewing on another body. And then
The head and the body reunite somehow.
Yeah. First the body reanimates without the head, and it kills the policeman. And then Art decapitates the policeman, and then he sticks the policeman's head on his body, and they're on the subway. And then somehow he gets his own head back.
I thought he was just going to like Jeepers Creepers it. Yeah. I think that he rides the subway to wherever his head is, and he goes in there. And
You're
and
right.
right as Chris Jericho is about to get killed, he shows up. It's crazy. And he gets his head back. And so now he and Victoria, that's the monstrous woman, and she's disgusting to look at because she got her face ripped off at some point. Oh gosh. So now they're a team. There's a funny part where they like ride the bus, and they're always covered in like gore and viscera and stuff. And another guy dressed, because this is the same night like as the end of the second movie. At this point it's the same night, so it's still Halloween. So another guy dressed as Art gets on, is like,
yo, you guys, you look so good. I mean, way better than mine. I mean, I was gonna do the blood thing too, but I was just worried about the cleanup. But can I get a picture? I'm gonna post this. You guys, seriously, you killed it. It's awesome.
and then it cuts away and it cuts to the next scene, and they're walking back into his lair, which apparently nobody ever disturbs. And he's wearing the clean costume. So obviously he had taken it from that guy, which is funny. He does that. He steals costumes. It's his MO. So you're right. We've got two parallel stories, and what it seems to be is that Art is trying to make his way to Sienna. They are connected. Sienna's brother figured all this out somehow in the last movie. He was a much bigger part of the last movie. I suspect that either he was unavailable or was uninterested in reprising his role, because he is not, like, he only films, I think, one scene with her. The other scenes, he's off at college doing his own thing. He's really not doing much. He's not in the movie a whole lot. He's a big part of the first one. He's kind of replaced in this one by Sienna's niece. They go, so once he gets his head back, they go back to the lair and they just like hibernate.
Yeah, that was interesting. She goes and sits in a bathtub full of disgust, and cuts her arm. I thought she was trying to kill herself or something.
I think she's already dead.
Because she saw herself in the mirror and was like, I look so ugly.
Oh, maybe she's not.
I don't know.
Maybe she's not dead at that point. Maybe she dies then, and that's when she gets possessed. I don't know. But anyway, whatever.
Yeah, she sits in a bathtub, and Art sits in a rocking chair that reminded me of Psycho. You know, the mother sitting in the rocking chair up in the high window of the tall house. But
yes.
I also read that it was meant to be an homage to Amityville because of the shape of the window, and also an homage to Black Christmas.
It immediately made me think of Black Christmas. That's the first thing that I thought.
It makes sense. This being a Christmas movie too, right? Yeah,
right.
And him being at first looks dead because he's covered in cobwebs. When we switch to present day, and there's a couple cleaning crew or something, demolition guys coming into the house, and they go up into the attic and they see this what appears to be a corpse, facing the window, and she is now her bathtub is filled with muck. I don't think it was before, so I don't know if she just bled out an awful lot or what the deal was. Just time.
It's gross.
It's pretty disgusting. And they walk over, and Art is eyes open, just staring straight ahead in this obviously like hibernated state. And as soon as the cops discover, or these two guys discover these two, they come to life and they murder them, and now they're back. And here we are in present day.
Brutally. And I feel like people would want to know
how they do it
about these kills, but that's
Yeah, sure.
that would be my complaint about the movie, is that I just didn't find it particularly interesting. It was just an opportunity to show off really the same kind of effects. It's not really creative.
Yeah.
Like, he chops them up with an axe, he smashes their head with a hammer, he cuts them up with a chainsaw, and it just looks like blades cutting into flesh and bones breaking off and legs getting chopped off and heads getting smashed, and it looks good, but it's kind of all the same.
It is, and
It ceases to be shocking. Like,
yeah,
I've seen this.
it ceases to be shocking because it's not creative. Those old slasher movies, part of the fun was just seeing what were the odd, different ways people were going to die. This movie doesn't really have that. And then, number two, it really doesn't have a lot of suspense either. And that's kind of his shtick, I guess. Art the Clown shows up, and that whoever he shows up in front of is going to be doomed. And he just plays with them for a little bit. They're more confused than anything, or they just think he's a guy in a costume goofing, and then he kills them. And that's really it. I mean, there's no stalking really involved, and it's not shot in a way where typical slasher is, with the stalking and the suspense and the POVs coming around the corner of the teenagers hanging out. There's just none of that. It's just very much in your face, like, oh, here comes Art the Clown. He's coming into a bathroom, and we know there are two people showering there, and we see Art doing all of his preparation before he finally goes in and kills them. And so I didn't get the same, what do you want to say, emotional investment, even with the kills and the process leading up to it, that I would get in its typical slasher movie.
I was still entertained because I do really like Art as a character, and David Howard Thornton is a really, really talented performer. He didn't originate the role, but...
Well, that's what I mean when I say that's like his shtick. It feels like that's the movie. That's what people are going to come to see.
Yeah.
They're not coming to see a suspenseful slasher. They're coming to see their favorite Art the Clown guy and how goofy he's going to be.
Right.
So.
Well, right. I mean, we did that too. That's what we did that with Freddy for years.
We did, but let's be fair. The Freddy movies had a strong degree of suspense and creativity that this one just doesn't have.
Sometimes.
Well, you're right. I mean, look. I mean, they're all kind of the same. But like, Freddy lives in the dream world, and there were very elaborate kind of situations, and sometimes they would escape, or they'd wake up, or things like that. Like, you never quite knew if he was going to get them at that moment. But you're right. We mostly saw it for him and his quippiness, and especially toward the later movies, and we liked him as a character.
But also, those movies we did go to specifically for the creative kills, because you could do anything in a dream.
Yeah.
And they did, and this is different. I mean, I honestly think that that's what he's working towards. I think that he's working towards a larger mythos, but he only started establishing it in the second movie, and it's so piecemeal at this point that I'm not really sure what's going on. Like, I get that Sienna is like a chosen one, but who chose her? Like, and I get that, like, her dad kind of knew, and it seemed like her dad's played by Jason Patric, by the way, who I never would have recognized.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's a small role. He's only in a couple of flashbacks, but it seems like he was somehow connected to it in some way, or he knew something, but he didn't tell her. And like, why not? And what are the rules? At this point, it feels futile. Like, she's killed him once. What, like, every time we've seen him die, he has been immediately reanimated.
Yeah.
The only reason that any time has passed here is because he decided to take a nap. Like, what are the rules?
Right.
And why is he taking a nap? Why wouldn't, it's the same. He's back. He's beat the shit out of her. She is weak. Just go get her again.
Yeah.
Like,
I didn't get that either.
I don't understand that.
Maybe he needed time for his head to fuse back, I don't know, like fully or something.
Well, and there's this, maybe, I guess,
or
a healing time, I guess. I don't know.
Craig, maybe it's like a whole Jeepers Creepers thing where he every 5 years, he comes back or something.
Well, that would be new. I don't know.
Speculating here.
Jonathan wrote that letter. She reads that letter. He said all of these things in the second movie. They just had to get them said again. That, like, as long as she's alive, they're vulnerable, and they know that, and so they'll always be coming after us.
Okay, By the way, I was really mad at that letter scene because for me, and having not seen the second movie, I'm like, this letter is important and it is way too long for me to read while in the short amount of time it's up on screen. So I literally paused it, and I was glad I did because if I had not read at least half of that letter, I would have still been in the dark about this whole demon thing because nobody else really explains it in the movie. It's literally this letter, and apparently the second movie.
Well, and I don't even remember if it was a letter then. It may have been. He said all those things to her. He figured them out somehow. Again, I don't really understand how.
Well, make the letter a little shorter, or at least have somebody come up to him and say, "You remember what I told you before, right? This, or read it out loud, or something like, throw me a bone here, so I don't have to."
She says the last line aloud, but that's not enough context if you don't know. So I feel like what the movie is trying to do is its paths that are going to converge is just going to take a while, and it does take forever. Like I think that he's making his way to her, but he really doesn't get to her until the very end. Meanwhile, she is just freaking out.
Yeah.
She's been in the mental institution this whole time. Her uncle came and picked her up. I think the uncle is married to the sister of her mom, who was killed in the last movie. And they have a daughter, Gabby, who apparently Sienna's really close with. Gabby, I feel like, really kind of becomes the surrogate for Jonathan. She's the Jonathan of this movie.
Gotcha.
So we're following their story, and she is like having hallucinations of her friends that were killed in the last movie, which, by the way, it totally was not her fault at all. Art was coming after her. They just happened to be in the way. She's having those hallucinations, and she starts thinking that she's seeing Art, but she is, because then he's around, but like he's not even like, there's one part where they're in the mall and he's right next to her and he stands and stares at her for a while, and then he just walks away and goes to do something else. Like, he doesn't seem to be in any particular hurry. I don't understand what is happening.
This was the thing that kind of annoyed me, is that she's freaking out, but her freaking out's because she's having dreams mostly and flashbacks to the old one. It just goes on for far too long. Like, I would have expected him to at least be, in another movie, what happens here is that the final girl's friends are getting murdered, or at least the people around them at the university or at the high school are getting murdered. I'm not saying that this movie has to follow, any particular convention. I'm just like, that's what kind of keeps that interesting, is that the final girl feels this impending doom because they see this real evidence around them that something's happening. It's probably this murderer that I just dispatched coming back for me. I'm freaking out and I need to protect myself. But in this, it's just, this stuff is sort of happening parallel that she doesn't even know about. I don't think it's until this mall scene that she hears about the mall murders and just
she hears about it later. The murders happen right after that encounter, right after she sees him.
Yeah.
They happen right after that, but she doesn't. She learns about it on the news later, so even more stuff happens between that.
Exactly. And it's an explosion, ultimately, at the mall. Art is dressed as Santa.
I was going to say, what I think we should do before time gets away from us is just, I don't even think sequence matters, but I feel like we should talk about some of these, the setup for some of these kill scenes, because the setups are great. But that's the thing, like, I don't know. I don't want to be too critical, because I did enjoy the movie more than I expected to.
No, I know what you mean.
It almost feels episodic, and then they're like, let's set up this great scene.
Yeah.
And then after that, let's set up this great scene. Like, they don't
tie into
feel particularly
a story.
Right.
Yeah, they don't tie into a coherent narrative, unless it's just, you consider it a road movie. These two are just slowly making their way to her, even though, as you said, they could be at her house at any time. Like, it's not like she's halfway across the country or anything. And like you said, he's literally next to her at one point and just walks away. So it's not that. It's just a whole bunch of, hey, this would be a great scene and a great kill. This would be a great scene and a great kill. Let's have them do all of these things while Sienna's freaking out and worrying. But again, she only has reason to worry later in the movie when it becomes clear to her that Art is back. Or he might be back, because I'm just going to say this explosion happens at the mall. An explosion can happen somewhere. I'm not sure why you would piece together, oh my God, that was Art and he's after me from that.
Right.
So even that incident that causes her to suddenly feel like it's real doesn't feel real.
She thought she saw him, but then she was doubting herself because she's seeing other things too. Then when she heard that, she thought, oh, it was him. I can follow that. I can follow that train of logic.
Okay.
That scene, I liked that scene. I thought, and you know, we glossed over the opening scene. It's very violent, and not only does he brutally chop up the parents, but he chops up the kid, too. Nobody is safe in these movies.
No.
Nobody. This scene, it made me very anxious because we'll talk maybe next about how he got the Santa suit, but he's got a Santa suit, and he comes into a mall, and he sees a mall Santa, but he takes advantage when the mall Santa goes on break. He sneaks up to the stage and coaxes the children towards him, and I was like, oh my God, is he just going to, like, massacre these children in broad daylight in front of their parents in the mall?
I was thinking that too.
And so because he's digging in his sack. He's always digging in his sack, and he's always pulling out something horrible to, like, murder you with.
Yeah, the sack is basically his toolbox, you know, of random...
It's Mary Poppins' bag, frankly. Like, he could pull a bulldozer out of there.
Right.
But instead, now, he starts pulling out toys, and he's just giving the kids toys, and they're all happy. And I kept waiting. I'm like, are they going to be full of razor blades?
Yeah,
like,
I did too.
Like, what's
Are they going to come to life? Is this like, you know, what was it, Silent Night, Deadly Night 4 or 5, the toy maker?
Or 5, yeah. Yeah, something.
One of the kids...
I just was surprised that nothing was happening. Everything seemed to be fine.
Yeah.
And then they grab him and throw him out, and he's resisting slightly, but, you know, he's going. And then it starts cutting back to this boy who's unwrapping this box, and I'm like, oh,
this is the thing.
This is the thing. And my immediate thought was, oh shit, it's a bomb.
Yeah.
And it was. The kid is unwrapping it. He goes, I wonder what I got. Boom. Oh, and this big... Yeah.
Surprisingly,
so some of the kids had scattered, so hopefully it didn't get too many of them. But...
Yeah, surprisingly kind of light on the gore and blood in this one, because there's a big explosion, but it's just fire, you know, and even lingers on the scene for quite a while, and it's just the stuff burning up. It was a very typical low budget explosion where people are supposedly dying, but you never see body parts flying or anybody burning or anything like that. And I was actually kind of disappointed in that respect, because it was very unclear how many people were actually... I just had to assume. I guess the idea is that he blew everybody up. I don't know.
The news report said, but I don't remember how many it said. This is just, you know, again, like I said, I really like the setups for these scenes, and they are fun scenes. I think that David Howard Thornton is great. I just think he does a really good job. You know, he has mime experience, and one of the documentaries that I watched, the director and everybody who's had anything to say about him said he's just magical. Like, he's just a real life Roger Rabbit. He can just do anything. You know, they're showing him behind the scenes, and they'd say you would never believe that this guy was Art the Clown,
right? Because
he's so affable and funny and nice and kind. He just gets the darkness of it. And he said once he gets a character, it's locked in. And he can just turn it off and on. And that's what he does. And I think he just gives a really good performance. I mean, the franchise, I think, rests on him.
Yeah. Like
you said before, people are coming to see this character.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of responsibility. And I think he's really gifted.
It is very much like Freddy Krueger and Robert Englund, you know. I mean, you couldn't imagine. Although he didn't play Art the Clown in the very first one, but, you know, it was a short, but it had the same spirit.
I think that he only took over in the first full-length feature.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
Correct.
The guy who played him before was just a friend of the director. He wasn't an actor. But he enjoyed doing it when it was just for short periods of time. But I think it was a mutual parting that the director wanted somebody with more experience, because his friend was not an actor at all.
For sure.
And the friend didn't enjoy the idea of being in that heavy makeup for extended periods of time. So
right.
I think they parted on friendly terms. But this guy, David Howard Thornton, was the 6th person to audition. He improvised. That's what got him the part. He improvised a kill where he killed somebody and then started carving their flesh, and he tasted it and made a yucky face and then started seasoning it with salt and pepper and then eating it again. And that's what got him the job. But yeah, I mean, these scenes, another scene, this scene actually comes before the mall. Mm-hmm. I'm not even going to remember all the kills because there are so many, but the scene in the bar was funny. And it was a great Christmas bar scene.
Yes, it was. I really liked this bit.
It's Christmas Eve at the dive bar, and it's just kind of the last sad stragglers and the corner Santas and stuff. And that's exactly what you got here. It's just these three guys, you know, one of them's Santa, one of them's Clint Howard, and one of them's the bartender.
Yeah, well, and the Santa is Daniel Roebuck. I mean, super familiar face. Has been in like hundreds of movies, and I was surprised to see him in this. I thought it was cool.
I didn't recognize him. Is he a horror guy? Is he just...
He's in every, like, he was in The Fugitive and Final Destination. Well, he was he was the agent, one of the agents in Final Destination, and he's in so much stuff, man. IMDb, I'm looking at it right now, 263 credits.
Wow. I think that people would not hesitate to do a cameo in these movies. These movies are wildly successful. They're wildly successful, and they have a devout cult following. The people who like these movies love these movies and can't get enough of them. So heck yeah, if I had an opportunity to cameo in one of these movies, you bet your ass.
I guess he was in, I haven't seen it, but he was in 3 from Hell. I'm just looking right now and I noticed that. So Walking Dead, and mostly not horror, but heck, he was in the remake of Halloween too.
He's the Santa, and he's a nice guy. Like, Art comes in and starts acting like he's super, super excited to see Santa. The other guys maybe kind of start to rib him or something. They're like, no, guys. If he wants to see Santa, everybody gets the same show or something like that. And so he humors him.
Yeah.
And I also didn't know where this was going to go, because it seemed like Art was almost genuinely like having kind of innocent fun.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I don't know if he was. Maybe he was having some fun, but as soon as they've had enough of him, like, he's sitting on Santa's lap at the bar. And as soon as Santa's like, seriously, buddy, that's enough, get off, then he starts pissing on him.
And this is another cute thing, which I think adds a little bit to this character. They get him a drink, and he drinks the drink, but he doesn't like the drink. It's like he's never had alcohol before. Or maybe he's just miming it. I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, he spits the drink out in the guy's face and then pisses all over him. That seems to turn the tables, unless Art was always planning on killing them. It's hard to know.
Probably. He kills everybody.
Yeah, but...
Except maybe that little girl. I don't know. He shoots one guy. He starts using guns in part 2, which I don't really like slashers who use guns. It seems too easy. It's lazy. But he shoots one guy and then kills Clint Howard somehow. I don't really remember how. And then he ties Santa up and steals his suit and tortures him with nitrous oxide, which, okay, that's something different. I appreciated that.
That was a little thing he put together in his workshop before. He was testing it on rats, right?
Yeah.
That was so... Okay, fine.
It's silly but funny. And yeah, that's a fun gag to, freeze a guy and, start shattering his frozen skin and stuff. And Santa had, Art had grabbed his beard and pulled it.
Oh, hey, Santa, it looks like you got a fan.
What's with the outfit, pal?
Yeah, did the circus come to town? Oh! Hey, buddy, watch it. That's the real deal. That's my beard. If Santa doesn't have a real beard, he's not a real Santa Claus.
And I knew as soon as he said that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And exactly what I thought would happen happened. Art rips his beard off and takes it with him.
Puts it on.
And that was a fun scene, too. It was a fun scene.
It was a fun scene.
And then there's the shower scene. What is there to say?
Yeah, who were these people, by the way? Were they friends of our... These were
randos. This was Jonathan the brother's college roommate and his girlfriend, who is also a douchey podcaster.
That's
who
right.
Wants to get them on her podcast.
I like that. Now we're starting to see a lot of douchey podcasters in movies. This is the second one this month. Now I'm starting to get triggered, man.
Yeah, I think they're onto us.
Well, they go late at night, and I don't even remember where. Is it a school? I guess it's supposed to be the shower room at the school and some locker.
Yeah, it's at like a frat party. I thought there was going to be more to this frat party because they made a big deal out of it. But the only thing that happens that I remember is she promises to him if he'll try to get his roommate or the roommate's sister on the podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
So then they go down to the shower and
they do it. In the shower alone, and Art sneaks up on them, pulls out of his bag, like you said, very improbably, a chainsaw, starts it right outside. She's like, what's that? and then just breaks through the door and chainsaws the both of them. He kind of manages to slip out on a broken leg and is crawling across the floor. And after he basically just hacks her to pieces inside the shower, as he's crawling away, Art takes the chainsaw right up the middle, starting at his groin. And that was pretty gross. But again, not the first time he's seen somebody just cut someone up from the groin to the head. I don't know. Is there a term for that?
I don't know.
I don't know. Anyway.
And so now we are finally, the only other important thing that we need to know is that in talking to her brother, Sienna thinks that Art is back. And so she needs to go back to the scene of the finale of the last movie to find that knife. We don't see her do that, but we see her come home with a box gift wrapped and her hands are filthy. So we know that she dug it up and she's wrapped it in a box and hid it in the back of the Christmas tree. At some point there's The Shining, but I don't remember when that happens.
Oh, well, it's at the house, right? I think this is the finale bit where they're in the house, Art shows up. I don't remember exactly how he manifests himself.
She just wakes up. Okay, so Sienna's aunt drugged her and gave her sedatives, not before Sienna talked to her brother and said, "You better come here." And he said, "Okay, I'll come." The uncle went off to get him. He called him on the phone. And he's like, I'm outside. Where are you? And the kid's like, "Where are you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm right outside your dorm." Now, we learned in the last movie that they can mimic people's voices, and they did this on the phone. It was mostly the little girl, who's not in this movie, by the way. It was mostly her that was doing it in the last movie, but they can do that. And so I knew this was a setup. I didn't know if you would or not. But so Sienna wakes up in her bed and goes downstairs, and Art and Victoria are just there. And Art is
in the kitchen
crucifying. Apparently, Art carried that body from the frat house to her house to crucify it up on the wall. I don't even know what the other crazy is doing.
She's got a crown of thorns on. Remember, she put on a crown of he put a crown of thorns on her at some point. This is maybe one of the few Christmas horror movies that we've seen so far that dare to have Jesus imagery in it as well as Santa imagery.
Oh my God. There was also a weird scene where Sienna was dreaming and she saw like the Virgin Mary overseeing a demon forging this sword?
Yeah.
That was so weird.
That was so bizarre. I thought this is going to come into play later. Maybe a later movie, right? This looks like something from the past or whatever. I don't know.
It's nothing we've seen before.
Wasn't it forging the sword she was going to use to...
Yes.
Yeah.
So, again, is suggesting a much larger mythology that surely they're going to explore later. But he gets the better of her somehow. He knocks her out or something with a mallet. And when she wakes up again, she and her aunt are both tied up in chairs. This finale really does go pretty quickly.
You think so?
I thought so.
I thought it was pretty long.
Victoria is taunting Sienna, and ultimately she says something. I wrote it down, but I'm not going to look for it. She says something like, who?
Jess. Right?
The aunt, right.
They're both sitting there.
That's her aunt.
Yeah, her aunts.
Yeah.
They're both sitting there tied up, and she starts kind of tormenting the aunt first, right?
Basically, what she tells Sienna is, "I'm going to take everything that you love, or I'm going to destroy everything that you love." So they do. She and Art. Oh my God, God! I was saying it wasn't creative, and I lied. I forgot about some of these kills. This one was gross. This one I read that the actor, Art, the actor, this one made him physically ill.
Yeah.
You want to tell about it?
I mean, they show her a cage. They show the aunt a cage, which has basically a skinless head in it that's being eaten by rats, and tell her that it's Gabby's. So she freaks out, and then they grab her, and basically he has a big acrylic tube that he pulls out of his bag, hammers it down her throat, and then they pull the rats out of that cage and they force them down her throat. And then as the rats are about, I don't know, down into her throat and who knows where, he slits her throat and the rats come out the throat and she's obviously very dead. It's just like really creative, I suppose. Isn't that taken off of some kind of ancient torture that the Greeks used to do or something like that? I don't know. I'm pretty sure I've heard of this one before, but
Maybe, I have no idea. It's, yeah, kind of, but I'm not sure either. At some point, Gabby shows up, and I'm not sure why they don't kill Gabby right away. That seems weird. If they're really trying to destroy everything that she loves, I don't get it, because she obviously loves Gabby the most. But Victoria tries to possess Sienna, and it seems like it's starting to work. Like, both of their eyes are glowing red, but Sienna's still too strong.
Yeah.
So Victoria says,
I'm gonna take everything you love, and then I'm gonna invade that pretty pink flesh of yours and destroy you from the inside out, just like I did this bitch. But first, I have a confession to make. That's not Gabby.
okay, well, I'll kill Gabby, and then you'll be totally empty, and you'll lose all will to fight me. And she goes and acts like she's going to, and Art's there with her. And Gabby says, I'm sorry I didn't get to give you my Christmas present. And for what reason? Victoria's like, would you like to have your present? And Sienna's like, yeah. And she's like, would you like to open it yourself? I'm like, why is she doing this?
I know, this is so weird. So then, instead of freeing her by cutting her bonds, Art comes over with a hammer, smashes both of her hands into bloody messes, then cuts her bonds. And I'm like, well, she can't open her present now. But this woman proceeds...
Her hands would be useless.
Her hands looked useless when she held them up. They were exactly like you would expect them to look. But then the movie completely ignores that for the rest of the movie. And I'll tell you, that really bothered me. I was like, come on, how lazy is this? Why would you even do that? Because then she opens the gift and it's the sword. And that makes all the difference. That was a big miscalculation on Victoria's part, but anyway.
I know.
So she's got the sword. And now can hold this heavy sword and swing it around and leap around the room, and her hands are fine.
I'm not being sarcastic when I say I think she's a superhero. I really do.
You're right.
I think that I do. I think that in the movie, she is some sort of she's like Buffy or something.
It makes it clear because at some point...
I don't think she even knows that.
Yeah, because at some point the ground opens up, so it looks like she's got the best of them.
Well, she kills the woman.
Right.
She decapitates the woman, and the light goes out in her eyes, in the woman's eyes, so it seems like she's dead.
And then Art has disappeared out the window, right? Like she turns around and he's gone.
No, there's a big moment. She's fighting him, and she gets the best of him, too. But that's when the floor opens up.
That's when the floor opens up.
We've seen these hellmouths before. There was a hellmouth in the finale of the last one, too.
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't recall it just, like, opening up out of nowhere. I don't really understand why that happened. I guess, fog started coming out of Victoria's body, and it, ate away at the floor or something. But just as Victoria is about to best Art, she's got him pinned to the wall with the sword in him. All she has to do is finish it, just push it all the way in. But in that very moment, the girl dies, and Art looks at her, and the conversation, the subtext between them is, you have to make a choice. You can kill me or you can save her.
Yeah.
So she makes the choice to save her.
Yeah, she doesn't die. She falls into the hell pit, but she's like hanging on by a thread.
Right.
So she grabs the sword, and because it's the only thing she can find, and she holds the blade end with her hands
So bad.
and asks her to grab the handle. And so she grabs the handle, but the sword slips out of her hands, and it cuts her hands, and the girl...
Because it's a knife blade.
Yeah,
a mystical
of course.
knife blade. Come on, you dummy.
Don't do that.
And so the girl falls in anyway, and the hole closes up, and then she turns around and Art is gone. The window's open and he's gone.
And she looks at her hands, and we see that her wounds on her hands mystically heal right in front of us. So you're right. We can explain away the smashed hands.
She has to be. There's no other explanation.
Yeah.
There's no other explanation because there's no way that she could survive the beatings that she's been given in these last two movies. It's impossible.
Correct.
To be fair, her brother in the last one gets pretty beat up too, but I don't know. He's her brother. Maybe he's special. At some point, they said that head was not really Gabby, which we know because we've seen her alive, but they insinuate that it was the brother. Now, we don't see the brother die on screen, and I know horror movies. They are leaving that door open on purpose.
Yeah.
They can bring him back if they want to.
They got a lot of doors open in this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Because she says says, "I'll find you, I promise." Like, okay, great. I guess I gotta see part 4 now. We see Art just sitting at a snowy bus stop, and like the Christmas music is playing again, and he just gets on the bus, and the woman on the bus is reading a book called The Ninth Circle, which was the title of the original short that Art was in. And the bus drives away, and that's just the end, right?
Yeah, it is. I think probably the next one, part 4, is going to be Art Goes to Hell or something like that, right? It's got to be.
I have no idea. I don't know where they're planning on taking it.
I mean, she's got to go to hell to find her.
Well, it seems like they are invested in this through line with Sienna. It seems like she has emerged as the Laurie Strode of this franchise.
Right. And like you said, she's like a literal superhero. Like, she's got a costume ready and everything. Like, her dad drew it. And you're right, she wore it, I guess, in the second movie, right? So
yeah, she made it and wore it.
Maybe this will become a superhero franchise. Art the Clown is the Joker.
Yeah, I don't know. All of the things that I can tell that you are not fond of, I understand, and I really agree with you on those fronts.
Well, don't get me wrong. I still enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed it way more than I enjoyed the first one, I'll tell you that. Because at least there was a story of sorts, even though I couldn't necessarily pick it apart or understand it, or I got a little impatient with it. I appreciated the fact it wasn't just a guy in a warehouse murdering a bunch of people. Although, like I said, in a real sense, that's what the first hour and a half kind of is.
Yeah.
At least it's far more interesting. And there's a story building. It's obvious they're trying to do something with it. And I appreciated that. I heard that Damien Leone is only interested in doing like one more, and that's it. But I can't see why somebody else wouldn't pick it up if the next one's just as successful as this one, I mean, if you're David Howard Thornton, you're sitting here happy as a clam, I'm sure.
Yeah. He's icon status at this point. I mean, he could make a living just doing cons.
Right.
But I would really be interested to see what you thought of the second one, because frankly, I think that the second one is a better movie than this one. And that makes sense to me because they had a long time. They could really take care with it. Not that I don't think that they took care with this. I do. They had a lot more help on this, and that makes a difference too. But I think the story is better. But I like this one because it is through and through a Christmas movie.
It is.
It is saturated in Christmas imagery.
Art is basically a killer Santa for half of it.
It is. I mean, it's in the vein of Silent Night, Deadly Night, whatever. But honestly, like, I want to see the Christmas episode.
Mm-hmm.
I like Christmas episodes of TV shows. I wish more film franchises like this would do a Christmas episode.
Yeah.
Do a Halloween episode. Do a Christmas episode. People have been shouting out for a Jason in the Wintertime movie for a decade.
Right.
People want to see these familiar faces in different circumstances. Yeah, dress Art up as Santa for one of the movies. I love it. And I'm not as fervent a fan as some people are. Our friend Caroline is a huge fan of these movies, and I'm sure that if she hasn't seen it already, I'm sure that she's waiting with bated breath to see it. So for those fans, I get it, and I'm happy that you have something like this, and I'm with you. I'm just a little bit out on the fringe. I'm not as fervent about it. I'm happy that you have something like this because these were, especially for me growing up, Freddy and Jason and Mike Myers, I so looked forward to every new installment. Even if it was bad, I looked forward to it.
Yeah, it definitely has that flavor.
I'm glad that people have this. And it was fun. I'm glad we did it for our ultimate Christmas episode. It put me in the spirit. It really did.
It really did. It was a solid Christmas horror movie with plenty of homages to classic Christmas horror movies. We had our Killer Santa. We had a lot of Christmas stuff. It had that nice, heartwarming holiday message of, family is important. And it was great. It was a great thing to do for Christmas. It was a great way to wrap up this year. We are going to be coming at you again with another New Year's episode next week. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey this year. We are really grateful at this time of year for all of you out there, whether you're our patrons or whether you are just a longtime listener or a fresh new listener. One of the best Christmas presents you can give us is just to introduce this podcast to a friend. Wrap it all up in a box with pretty wrapping paper and a nice bow and hand it to a horror fan that you love. We love to welcome new people into the Two Guys and a Chainsaw family. Till next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Merry Christmas indeed from all of us here at Two Guys and a Chainsaw.